Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome all to the webinar, Impact of COVID-19 on Women in Higher Education. I'm Joanna Ragulska. I'm Professor of Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies and Vice Provost and Dean of Global Affairs at the University of California, Davis. I'm also a co-chair of the APRU Asia Pacific Women in Leadership Program. This webinar is hosted by APRU and the University of Sydney. As a network of leading universities linking the Americas, Asia, and Australasia, the Association of Pacific Rim Universities is an association of 56 leading research universities of Asia Pacific region. It brings together leaders, researchers, and policymakers to exchange ideas and collaborate on effective solutions to the challenges that we are facing these days in the 21st century. Can I have the next slide, please? We leverage collective education and research capabilities of our members into the international public policy process to make an impact in our region and beyond. And as you see, those universities from different parts of the world are listed. And if I can have the next slide. Our primary research areas include natural hazards and disaster risk reduction, women in leadership, population aging, global health, sustainable cities, artificial intelligence, and the future of the work, the Pacific Ocean, and labor mobility. If I can have the next slide. What I would like to introduce to you today is the Asia Pacific Women in Leadership Program at APRU, which seeks to address the complex social and economic barriers to women's advancement in leadership. If I can get the next slide, please. So this program was launched in 2013, and it convenes APRU senior leaders and staff members. And you can see on these pictures our meetings together. And in fact, the bottom picture is from a University of Sydney's when we met. I think actually this was one of our last meetings, or maybe one before. And it was a lovely time in Sydney that we could get together. The objectives of the APWiL program is to really enhance the institutional competitiveness of APRU universities, but also to advance the participation of women in academia and research. Think about the different pathways that women can take and contribute to the policy development in bridging the gender gap in higher education. And as you can see on the next slide, we have several member universities. I co-chair the APWiL program with a colleague of ours, Sabrina Lin, who is at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Can I have the next slide, please? In 2019, with our colleagues actually at University of Sydney and other members, we have put together a gender gap report. And this gender gap report surveyed 40 leading universities in the region. And one of the funding from the survey was that in many ways, universities in Pacific Rim have made little progress in moving into university leadership position over the last several years since the previous report was done. So despite the fact that we have numbers of initiatives, despite the fact that we have put numbers policy into the place, we began to think, what is it that we can do to really advance women to engagement and to show their contributions and to build the pathways towards them engaging in the leadership. So if we look at the gender gap report between 2013 and 19, We actually say there hasn't been really much significant change. Um, our male colleagues are still dominating university leadership positions. In fact, there has been some decrease in executive position occupied by women. And when we thought about what is the next steps, and we asked our members, many, in fact, 96% respondents said that we need to focus on leadership, on development, and work-life balance. Hence, as you see on our next slide, we came up with the idea of developing a APRU mentoring program. And this is a pilot program that we have actually just initiated a few months ago that is really trying to build a pipeline of women, future women leaders, identifying some professional opportunities for growth and skills development, increasing awareness. So women are actually not only knowing that there are challenges, but also being aware of what these challenges are and what are the successful strategies that we can build. We want to build the network. We want to build the network of senior leaders among the APRU institutions, because we do know that collective power and working together makes really a big difference. But because APRU have so many different universities as a members, one of the tremendous assets is that we actually can build a global intercultural collective network of our participants. And those we can think about different cultural, ethnic, gender dimensions of the leaderships and how we can share together in a common engagement. As you'll see on the next slide, we have numbers of participating universities that are part of this year pilot project. We have created a basically 15 pairs of mentors and mentees, and that allows us to share. And the idea of connecting the pairs was such that nobody from the same institution is connected. And in fact, we were trying to match as far as possible so people can gain different experiences and share knowledge, but also share the different experiences. So we invite you to get involved and engage in opportunities. And if we're going to switch up here, thank you. Engage in these opportunities to really enhance the gender equity across the Asia Pacific. And you can find more information on our website, APRU, and Jackie Wong, who is the director, is with us and happy to assist us. There is a program coordinator, Chelsea House, and Chelsea's email address is also included. So now, without further ado, let's move to the most important part of our program. And then I would like to introduce a close colleague and friend, Kati Bello, who is a professor of comparative genomics and pro-vice chancellor for global engagement at the University of Sydney. She will be our MC and moderate this session. Kati has been a very long-term leader of APLO program and actually currently serves as the APRU International Policy Advisor Committee co-chair. So we encourage all of you to visit the event website for future events, and there will be many more opportunities to engage. And also there are the biography of each speaker today. So Kati, to you.
Thank you, Joanna. And it's true, I've met some amazing women through the APRU networks, and Joanna being one of them. So thank you, Joanna. And welcome to you all to this APRU workshop, Impact of COVID-19 on Women in Higher Education. So as many of us know, as the world went into lockdown this year due to the pandemic, we just didn't realize the impact that it would have on women. But the OECD report has recently found that COVID has particularly hit women hard because almost 70% of healthcare workers are women, and they've been very vulnerable to infection during the pandemic. At the same time, women have been shouldering much of the burden at home, looking after children and elderly family members. And we all know, of course, that there are long-standing gender inequalities around unpaid work. Women have also faced high risks of job and income loss, and increased risk of violence, exploitation, abuse or harassment during times of crisis and quarantine. And our own colleagues, women in academia, have faced a similar fate. We know that research outputs for women have plummeted during this lockdown period, while interestingly, men's outputs have increased. So in this webinar, we're going to explore these issues a bit more. We're going to talk to leading researchers to discuss the challenges that women face during the lockdown and the strategies that can be used to overcome these barriers to help us with publishing, forging new research partnerships, and finding funding. And thinking about what policies universities could take up to help address some of these challenges. So I'd ask all of you who are listening in to please use the Q&A function to post questions. We will do questions at the end of the session following our three speakers, but I do encourage you to post your questions as you go so that you don't need to remember them for the entire period. So please do post questions, and please also use social media to share our learnings from today. We would encourage you to tag at APRU 1997 or hashtag APRU when you're doing your posts, just so that we can keep a track of them. So welcome to everybody who is here. I'm really delighted that you've joined us, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our three speakers. As Joanna mentioned, the bios for all of our speakers are on the APRU website, so I won't read through all of those, but I'll just run through the names of our three speakers and then we'll go straight to our first speaker. So we have Dr. Bahar Mahmani, who works at Elsevier. And for poor Bahar, it's 3 a.m. at the moment because she's in Europe and she's got sleeping children in the house. So thank you very much, Bahar, for joining us. We also have Professor Maiha Sham, who is the new Pro-Vice Chancellor and Vice President at CUHK. And Professor Kalindi Vora, who is Professor of Gender, Sexuality and Women's Studies and Director of the Feminist Research Institute at UC Davis. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Bahar Mahmani from Elsevier, and she's going to share her recent research on No Tickets for Women in COVID-19 Race, a study on manuscript submission and reviews in 2,347 Elsevier journals during the pandemic. Thank you, Bahar.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for a great introduction. Let me just share my screens. So can you confirm that you are able to see my slides?
Yes, we can see your slides.
Brilliant. All right. So I would like to tell you a little bit about the study that we ran on Elsevier journals to understand how COVID-19 lockdown impacted women in academics. In the introduction by Kathy, we all heard about the impact that the lockdown and homeschooling and childcare had put on women. Many started to talk about it in social media and in different channels. And actually towards, sorry, I think my slides are stuck. Oh no, now it moves. So around April, I think, was the time that I noticed on Twitter, for example, some journal editors and active researchers on Twitter were voicing their concerns about, the impact of the lockdown on women academics. And with the support of Elsevier's Inclusion and Diversity Board, we started to collect the information and the data from our journal submission system and run this study in collaboration with 3 academics with whom I previously had also collaborations on other studies, including gender bias and peer review at large scales. The 3 researchers, I put the pictures also here, are members of a European cost action about running study on peer review and concerning peer review as a serious research topic. So with the help of Professor Flaminio Sguazzoni, who is a social scientist from the University of Milan, Francesco Grimaldo, who is a data scientist from the University of Valencia, and Gian Giacomo Bravo, who is a statistician, we looked into 2,347 Elsevier journals across different disciplines, across different tiers, and almost 6 million academic submission and peer review activities. Now, what we found, as you can see on the left pane, we saw that in general, the submission during the months of lockdown, which we considered from February till May in 2020, in comparison to the average of 2019 and 2018, has increased. Now, in order to understand how that impacted individual women and men, we needed to identify the gender. And we do not ask researchers upon submitting or accepting a review in our submission systems to identify their gender. So we had to run the names of these 6 million researchers through the best-in-class gender identifiers and dictionaries of names to guess their gender. Now, the limitation, of course, is that our study is quite binary because of the inherent bias of these dictionaries of names. We don't have any view on non-binary genders. That said, we could see that submission of all academics increased during the months of lockdown, particularly in health and medicine. As our journal editors sometimes refer to, there was a tsunami of submissions, but women comparatively submitted less than men, significantly less than men. And on the right side, you see the peer review activities. We also looked into the peer review activities to see whether the reviewer acceptance rate changed in the months from February to May 2020, comparing to the previous years. And we see that that is not significantly changed between men and women, although in health and medicine, again, we see that women are accepting less review invitations, understandably. Now, this is what we see by just looking at the sheer volume of data. We wanted to also see the robustness and significance. So we basically estimated a mixed effect model for basically using the gender, as I mentioned, and the seniority of researchers to measure the difference in submission for women and men. And this is what we found. So 2 things. One, to consider the fact that lockdown didn't start in all countries at the same time, and researchers are coming from different countries and have different affiliations. We introduced affiliations as a random parameter, and also for the seniority, the only proxy we had was the prefix that the researchers use upon registering for submission or accepting review in submission systems. That is either professor or doctor or non-professional prefixes. Now, that professor and doctor is our kind of proxy for seniority level in academia, which is not a great proxy, but that was the only thing we had. At the moment, we are running our data through Scopus to find the number of years between the first publication and the submission in 2020 to fine-tune that seniority level further. But what we found out was that there was a significantly negative effect for professors and doctor women in the fields of health and medicine, physical sciences and engineering, social sciences and economics. And you see that the effect for doctors and professor women is even higher than non-doctor women, and yet alone in comparison to the men counterpart. And we think the main reason is that these are women in their late 30s, mid 40s, potentially having families with small children, and school closure and other care duties are basically penalizing these women. Now, what are the consequences? Obviously, submission is not necessarily publication, but eventually those submissions will turn out to publication. And it seems that this little window of submission increase that is open to academics has been mostly harvested by men, meaning in future, say in 2 years' time, they will have more publications, particularly in health and medicine related topics, more publications with high number of citations potentially that will allow them to also get a higher chance in grant applications and promotions in particularly prestigious institutions. And that will widen the gap that is already quite noticeable in gender of academics in STM. Now, what can we do? I think one of the simplest thing is that the funding agencies and hiring and promotion committees at national and international level consider this gender gap that has been opened during the lockdown period, and also maybe disregard or discount the COVID-related publications and citations thereafter from applicants of future grant applications, or ask grant application candidates to provide a COVID-19 impact assessment statement that helps to assess the publication and put everything in the right place. And also, now that universities and institutions are opening in a hybrid mode, provide some support and family-friendly hours and times, and particularly childcare services that allows women to start again focusing on the research and come back to the pace that they had previous to lockdown. And with that, I would like to thank you again for inviting me to present our findings, and I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards.
Thank you very much, Bahar. That was a very enlightening talk and very sobering figures to see such a big gap opening up. Next up, I'd like to introduce Professor Mai-Ha Sham, who is the new Pro-Vice Chancellor and Vice President at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I knew the cat would end up crashing the call at some stage. Mai-Ha is also the Cho Ming Lee Professor of Biomedical Sciences, and her own research has been impacted by the pandemic. So over to you. Thank you, Mai-Ha.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for the kind introduction, and also thank you for inviting me to share the situation in Hong Kong with you all. Next slide, please. In general, Hong Kong is falling behind in the gender diversity. It's the same in the business sector and also the same in the academic sector. So if you look at the senior female academic, that are the full professors, currently in the whole of Hong Kong, we only have 18.8%, Overall, for female academics, we are only 40% compared with the male counterparts. Next slide, please. For the situation in the Chinese University of Hong Kong, we are quite similar to the overall situation in Hong Kong. This is a summary of the last 15 years in terms of the gender distribution of our academic staff. You could see that as we go up in the seniority, the percentage of women go down. So the blue line are the lecturers and the teaching staff, and we have roughly about 50-50. There's quite a good gender balance. But if you look at the red and the yellow line, these are the full professors. So 15 years ago, we had only about 10%, 20%. So now, in the last few years, slowly, we are climbing up. So probably there are certain things that we've been doing in the last few years that were right. So therefore, slowly, the senior academic percentage are doing a little bit better. Next slide, please. So overall, compare with the first slide I show you, that's the situation in Hong Kong. In the Chinese university, senior female full professors, we are about 20%. The red bars represents the female staff. This is remarkably similar to the percentage that Joanna showed in her presentation earlier. So this is actually very similar to the worldwide trend. So therefore, 4 out of 5 senior professors are male. So only 1 out of 5 are women. But in terms of overall total female academics, in the Chinese university, we are still, really a little bit low. We only have 35-36% that are women. Next slide, please. You would have thought that among the STEM disciplines, probably there will be a lower percentage of women. This is true to some extent. For science and engineering, if you look at just the shorter red bars, for science and engineering, indeed, women are severely underrepresented. We only have 10 or 18%. Surprisingly, in medicine, we are not doing too badly. It is in the faculty of law that we have very, very few female staff. Next slide, please. So since a few years back, we have set up a task force on women and family-friendly policies. Under the task force, we also organize a mentorship program where our female colleagues will be forming advisors, advisees pairs with the view of helping the female colleagues to pursue their goals and to progress along their professional development pathway. Of course, these mentorship programs also cover various aspects of work-life integration and other soft skills and leadership skills advancement. Next, please. So currently, we have policies to offer the opportunity for female staff who are on maternity leave or extended leave to defer their tenure review, their substantiation review. With the COVID-19 looming, with the pandemic, in fact, we do have policy of allowing the deferral of up to a year for colleagues to undergo their tenure and promotion review. Of course, this policy is applicable to both men and women. We also have employee assistance program in place and provide professional and personal counseling consultation to staff members. With the current situation of the COVID-19, obviously this is a channel that our colleagues can seek help. Next, please. We have conducted a mini survey to ask our advisee pairs how they have been experiencing the impact of COVID-19 in their work, life, and in their professional development. So we have a reasonable good turnout rate. And I would like to share with you a few interesting findings. You may see that there is certain echo to the situation that you're experiencing in your institution, in your place. Next, please. So first of all, research. While some of the colleagues are doing very well, they are coping very well, but also there are also some others who really feel that the overall productivity of research were affected. The field work and data collection, many of these are not taking place, so obviously these are negatively affected. But even in preparation of publications and funding proposals, they feel that they're suffering as well because the grant application deadlines the report deadlines are still there. It's still there despite COVID-19. Next, please. So another area that is seriously and severely affected is international collaboration, because many of our research pursuit is depending on our link with our international collaborators and partners. So with COVID-19, because of traveling and all the other lockdown in some other countries, so international collaborations are seriously affected. Of course, we are not able to join the international conferences in a face-to-face manner. A lot of things are turned into online. And some of the fellowship and visitorship programs are not able to be undertaken. So collaboration is one area that is hard hit. Next, please. Now teaching, because we are a teaching and research university, many of our colleagues are in the face of the COVID-19, we are turning our classes into an online or mixed mode, both face-to-face or online. So a lot of time are also dedicated to technology development, e-learning, and then suddenly in a very short frame of time, our colleagues have to pick up new skills and turn their courses into an online mode. Obviously, this is an opportunity to develop, but at the same time, it also eats into the research time. So there are various challenges, even just on the delivery of the teaching itself. Of course, supervision, student assessment, mentoring of the research students, all of these are affected. Next slide, please. Now, other than the professional development, how about the personal well-being? Interestingly, our female academics, these are selected group, they are coping very well, even though the personal life, personal well-being are affected, but it is a bit less severely affected than their professional development. So obviously family commitment, work-life balance, even mental health well-being, all of these are affected to some extent. But it is less severe compared with research, teaching, and the international collaboration. Next, please. So in this survey, our colleagues actually come up with these recommendations. So so some of the suggestions include the setup of support groups for female academics across different faculties, different disciplines. It would be a good idea to have flexibility or adjustment to the annual performance review system. It would be good if the institution, the university, could actively reach out to the funding agencies and secure automatic extension of funding or report deadlines. In my position at the moment, like every other day, I am approving extension of project completion deadline for the internal fundings. So it would be nice for the external funding if institutions can take a more active role. And of course, because of the teaching that I was talking about, it will be good if there are additional teaching support that are provided. Last but not least, support to postgraduate students are equally important. So it is a young group of early career researchers that they should also be looked after. So this is the end of my sharing. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maiha. Next, we're going to move on to Professor Kalindi Vora. Kalindi is a professor of gender, sexuality and women's studies and director of the Feminist Research Institute at UC Davis. Over to you, Kalindi. Kalindi, you're still on mute.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, or good morning, everyone. I'm going to share some of the projects that we've been working on at the UC Davis Feminist Research Institute in the last year. These projects intend to shift research culture to address the needs of women faculty and also Black, Indigenous, and people of color faculty, because we see these as necessarily linked. I'll start by spending a few minutes sharing some early data about the impact of COVID-19 on women workers in the US. And then I'll explain some of the ways that we are addressing these issues for women in research at UC Davis. Next slide, please.
Kalindi, we can't see you. Have you got something in front of your camera? Ah, perfect.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
We want to see you. Lovely. Thank you.
The data on this slide is, and the next, come from the McKinsey Consulting Firm's annual Women in the Workforce report for 2020. In general, in the US, women in heterosexual dual career households are 1.5 times more likely than male partners to spend 3 or more hours on housework and childcare per day. And as this graphic is meant to illustrate, childcare for young children is so disproportionately managed by mothers during COVID-19 in the US that they are much more likely to either step back or completely leave the workforce. The first bar graph represents people considering downshifting their careers with numbers of men in black and women in blue. The second graphic illustrates the same categories for people considering leaving the workforce entirely. So 17% of women consider stepping back and 23% leaving entirely. In fact, in September alone, 1.1 million people left the workforce, with the large majority, with Latinas being overrepresented in that population. So 1.1 million people, 80% of them are women. Data shows that the loss of women in leadership is particularly harmful to institutions and corporations because women leaders are the most likely statistically to promote environments that support the voices, needs, and careers of not just women, but also underrepresented minority community members. Next slide, please. So unsurprisingly, the impact of COVID on Black, Indigenous, and women of color workers looks even worse. For example, the same McKinsey study found that Black women have always, of course, faced huge barriers to their advancement. Now, in addition to the heightened pressures that Black women who are parents are experiencing or caregivers, they are also dealing with distinct issues because of race. So the COVID-19 crisis has disproportionately affected Black people in the United States and exacted a heavy emotional toll and mental toll on Black women in particular. On top of all this, as you can see in the furthest left bar graph, many Black women do not feel supported by their managers or coworkers. Next slide, please. So this graphic is from a different study. It's an ongoing study in 2020 by Alpert Abrams and DeGrazia that is tracking academic institutional responses to the pandemic. And so far, they've collected results from 300 survey participants from more than 100 institutions in the last 6 months. And the data here is from their survey on caregiving. The darker the red tone, the less supported the caregivers feel. So the authors found that few caregiver faculty feel adequately or fully supported in their institutions. And one of their general findings is that institutional COVID policies are disproportionately harmful to the most vulnerable members of university communities, including those who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, disabled, first generation, queer, and immigrants. So in general, authors found that COVID policies are creating an unsustainable work environment for most people involved in student learning in general. Next slide, please. So to break down what institutional support for caregivers means here, they offer data on the low percentage of institutions taking actions to support childcare costs related to the pandemic. So you see those small numbers here. Next slide, please. This data shows that scheduling and workload support is most commonly found in the form of flexible schedules and working from home options, with a smaller number of institutions offering to pause the tenure clock, so the schedule for advancement. And while these policies are helpful because they reduce immediate pressure on caregiving faculty, in the long term, we know this will impact the advancement of these faculty in other ways. The article concludes that the institutions that have had the most success addressing the burden of caregiving for faculty have done it in response to organized action. So faculty or students forming groups and then approaching leadership together. The authors rightly explain that this needs to happen now in order for 2021 to offer improved conditions for everyone involved in student learning. And so I would urge you to look at that study and their recommendations for action. Now, I want to share a few things that the UC Davis Feminist Research Institute has been doing, both now and beyond the pandemic. These are programs we've been building and which have grown dramatically during the pandemic due to increased demand. Next slide, please. Oh, the images aren't there for some reason. At the Feminist Research Institute, which we refer to as FREE, we see the increased impact of COVID on women of color, and particularly on Black faculty and students as part of a much larger issue of university culture. As of 2016, 4 years ago, women accounted for only 37.5% of all tenured faculty in US colleges and universities, and women of color filled only 8% of tenured positions. There are many structural reasons to explain why we fail to recruit and retain women of color faculty, and the UC Davis Feminist Research Institute is addressing the large role played in that by academic research culture itself. So we've been developing programs to shift institutional research culture to be more inclusive of women and people of color through our research trainings and through publications. So for example, in summer of 2020, the Institute offered a workshop addressing privilege and anti-Blackness together in research culture. We had 300 people RSVP and 200 showed up. And this is quite rare because the university life ramps down here in summer. Out of that event, we formed a group of faculty and staff researchers who are working to provide a list of best practices to shift research culture on campus. And what's interesting is that in that working group, many of the issues that come up raised by faculty and staff pertain not to research specifically, but to the lack of support for caregivers, not just now, but in general. And the argument that this adds to an already unfair research environment for Black faculty, Black women faculty in particular, and women in general, of course. So in other words, these faculty are facing many layers of disadvantage, and one that feels especially heavy is feeling penalized for caregiving responsibilities when they come up for promotion and advancement. Another program working to shift research culture is our training series, our research training series called Asking Different Questions. Here it's referred to on the slide as ADQ. We train researchers across disciplines to understand and accommodate histories of bias, exclusion, and even violence in the history of research practice in their fields. We then use feminist pedagogical tools to engage participants, many of whom are scientists and engineers, at the level of their own experience. The truth is, when people can bring their whole selves into their work, and data stands behind this, including their background and expertise that comes from outside of what is a predominantly white and male academic norm, we see exciting and innovative ideas and findings. We also train participants to include sex, gender, and race appropriately in their research design, and we use decades of social science research to do this. So participation in this training program, which is running right now, is more than 4 times what we expected even before the pandemic. So 89% of our current participants feel they can take immediate action on what they've been learning. And after the first session in a series of 8, 100% said that they wanted to return for the full set of trainings. This is unusual even in the best of times, but during a pandemic when everything is on Zoom, we found it notable. So to conclude my remarks, the pandemic has intensified the burden for women faculty and particularly women of color faculty, but it's not a new burden. This means that we can take action now, that actions that have both immediate and long-term benefits for supporting faculty and also shifting research culture moving forward. And I welcome any questions about our particular programs or our participant feedback.
Thank you so much, Kalindi. And I wonder, as you know, we all work within the APRU network, how we can share these learnings and these training sessions, because I can see that the different universities have all, you know, found ways to provide support, training and help to academics during this period. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity there for us to work together and to learn from each other. Now I'm going to check the Q&A session to see if we have, I don't have any questions in here. Lots lots of hellos. So for those of you who are online now, please feel free to send through some questions. I know all of our speakers would be keen to answer some questions. But while we're waiting for those to come through, I might launch in and ask Bahar first. One of the things I've noticed as a woman in science is the number of papers that I'm getting to review has gone through the roof, and I'm declining more and more and more papers to review. And the editors are being quite forthright in saying, look, we're trying to find some women to review papers at the moment. We're trying to get gender balance on our review panels. So I was just wondering if you could comment on, whether, how widespread this phenomenon is, and what suggestions you have to women who are trying to juggle work and so many reviews coming in, more so than ever before.
Absolutely. I think one of the reasons, as you mentioned, is the situation we are at, and also in particularly in health and medicine, the increase in number of submissions, COVID-related submissions. But say this is a wave, I think, and it will eventually get back to the normal times. But what won't get back to normal is the workload, right? So the number of review invites might slightly change, but it won't change dramatically, because still people are, working on new topics and they are going to submit, and everyone is pushed for publication. At the end of the day, a researcher output is only counted in the number of papers. And until the moment that the research activity is being measured by a wider range of metrics, including the peer review activities, I don't think researchers, including you and many other, regardless of the gender and ethnicity, would prioritize peer review to the other duties that they have in academics. And that is a bigger question to not only journals, but also institutions, evaluation committees, funders, that they need to think about. A researcher is more than just one, wears more than just one hat. They are also teachers. They have teaching duty, which is also quite a time and bandwidth consuming duty, and the peer review activities that they do for journals, but also for grants. And that is need to be recognized and somehow counted in the evaluations.
I agree. I wonder whether any of our other speakers would like to comment on their own experiences during the pandemic in terms of publication or reviewing in their own specific discipline areas. Myheart, do you want to say something?
Yes, yes. I'm not particularly going to share my own view, but I want to give a bit of a response to the discussion just now about engaging women faculties in reviews, either review journal articles, grant reviews, and so on. Because all the figures show very clearly that the percentage of women faculties are just lower than the male counterpart. So if we are cautious about the gender diversity and gender balance, then the women will have to work harder because there are fewer of them in the first place. And I think that this is, is the two sides of coin. I think it's not going to go away. On one hand, if we want to achieve a gender balance, and inevitably, some of us will have to work a little bit harder until the time when the situation is a bit more mature, a bit more balanced, then we will be a little bit more relieved. So in the meantime, what can we do? Various things. Of course, the ultimate goal is to have a balance, a gender balance. But I think that it is also for the male colleagues, our male faculties, they need to increase, or change a little bit of their perspective and sensitivity. It's not necessarily women who are supportive for women. It's the entire academic arena that we are talking about. Yeah, so this is what I would like to respond.
Thank you. Joanna, did you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to follow on my comment, because I think the biggest challenge for all of us is changing the culture, and changing the culture in a way that so much of marginalization and discrimination is actually invisible. So yes, women are asked to review, women are asked to mentor students, women are asked to mentor more colleagues. All of this actually doesn't get rewarded at all, right? Because what's get rewarded is the publications. So do you put more time and effort in building maybe the pipelines and taking care of others, but you're gonna not get rewarded for that. And that is actually very important, because this does translate into the pay inequities. The salary gaps, the wages gap, it's tremendous in academia. And some of you who might be following is there are two right now. One was very famous case recently in Princeton, when Princeton University put $1 million to actually eliminate the pay gap. In another case, Rutgers University women faculty actually went to the court because there were promises, and yet it's not happening. So what we have, on the one hand, we have invisible. The invisible is getting translated into the fact that women have less time, that they are publishing less, or that they are applying for grants less. And then subsequently, that has also translation into the pay inequities, which means that they have less resources, less money, and that it's also suppressing the progress. And I actually want to go back to my heart said about the deferral policies, because there has been quite a bit of debate about the deferral policies, that some women don't want to have another year. They want to have more support. So actually they want to get promoted, because if they defer, that's where the gender wages gap is increasing. That's where the promotions are, delayed and so forth, right? So what is the most effective? What can we do to actually maybe even rethink the kind of actions we're taking at the level of universities?
And Joanna, that feeds very nicely into a question that we've got from Ana Villacontiago, who's one of my colleagues at Sydney. She'd like to know how the panelists think we can redefine success and excellence in academia. How do we give value to everything, not just publishing? We're all nodding. We all agree, Anna.
Can I offer something?
Yes, please.
One thing that is interesting is the National Women's Studies Association in the US, which is a very multidisciplinary field, has offered a guideline for universities in the promotion and review for scholars and from a feminist perspective. And they recommend looking at activities like mentoring, like community work and activism, but also including pedagogical contributions. And they give suggestions for how to weigh these as academic output. Another example is I'm on the editorial board of a journal called Catalyst, Feminism, Theory, and Technoscience. So it's a science and technology studies journal. And we've tried to create places for people to share products that they've produced from research and teaching and go through peer review so they can actually get publication credit for work they've done that's not in the typical article format. And so these are just two ideas, but even at the specific university level, I've been in 2 universities where the administration has allowed departments to create review structures internally, and then to argue for the merit of a case for, say, tenure based on internal qualifications. So for example, in my current department, we have someone who has a law degree, as well as a creative writing degree, as well as a social science PhD. And that person, we were able to get that person credit for all of that productivity because of this policy. So those are just 3 examples. I love this question, and I think that it's a good place to think with.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kalindi.
To add to Kalindi's comment, I hear in the Netherlands, they are also working on diversifying the metrics based on research performance. And one of the items that is included is the teamwork, because most academics need to have that kind of a capability to work in a team and cope with conflicting ideas and to manage PhD students, and that is quite an asset. So I was delighted when I heard that that is also part of, you know, the evaluation of academics for promotion.
That's great. Moving on to the next question. This is a question from Anders Carlson. What are the potential advantages that a hybrid online or on-site work site could bring? And how can we do this hybrid model without increasing inequalities? Who'd like to tackle that one? I know myself, I was just talking to a colleague. I'm at home just with the pets, so I've found working from home fantastically productive. My colleague has small children at home and she has had the most challenging year ever this year. And she goes into work at any chance she gets because then her husband has to look after the kids while she's at work. I just wonder if anybody else has made any observations or has any suggestions for how hybrid working may be made a little bit more fair for people with kids at home.
I can give a short response. Actually, I will not be able to give an answer right away in terms of the advantages of a hybrid mode and what can be done. However, I would like to say that probably we are going towards a direction that is forward. We are not going to go back. That is, from now on, what we used to as face-to-face interaction are not likely to be like that anymore, because we do experience a mixed mode and an online mode, and we do see the advantages. For example, participation in events without traveling and being accepted as a norm. You know, we used to participate without physically there, but it's not accepted as a norm, but now it is accepted as a norm. So therefore, there are certainly conveniences and advantages, but it's complex. So which is what I said earlier, that I will not be able to give a simple answer, but we can see that there are good points and there are also the inconveniences. But the question also point very, very clearly towards inequalities. So I think the way forward is that it is likely that our lives are going to have a mixed mode. Therefore, we have to explore together as we are going towards a mixed mode of online and physical interaction, what we should work together, how we should work together, so that maybe we can make use of this situation and push the gender diversity and issue to do with the gender diversity faster, because it may offer us an opportunity. That's what I would like to comment on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Of course, I think one of the big issue is also we need to think about our graduate students and postdocs and so forth, right? So these are the generations that are coming now, and of course, what's going to happen with the opportunities, with the access, because maybe for some of the scholars who are more senior and have their networks, the networks are developed. For more junior, the upcoming generation, they need a network. We know that the social networks are so important because this is where information and support and knowledge, right? All of these things are happening. So I think that is something that I worry about, thinking how we need to rethink what we're offering the next generation in order for them to compensate for the losses that they are right now experiencing.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've noticed myself that the more early career researchers have flocked back to work much more quickly than the senior professors, who of course are sitting on lots of data and are happy to stay at home and write. Whereas the many of the more junior people are still generating data and are craving those opportunities to discuss results with more senior colleagues. We might move on to the next one. It's a long question from Elizabeth Lacoutre, so I won't read all of it. But Maha, it's a question for you on how you feel that the political situation in Hong Kong has impacted women, and whether you see any specific strategies to support women during this time.
Yeah, this is a very long question, and I thank you for pointing out really currently a very complex situation. We had the social unrest last year, then we have COVID-19, we have the geopolitical situation that are currently taking place in Hong Kong, and not long ago, we also have a Sino-China trade war almost breaking, almost. And so the situation is really very complex. How do all of these added up together having an impact on a female academic life? Are women suffering a little bit more than men? I think this is, I would say, from an academic point of view, this really offers a very interesting study. You know, how does the actual pandemic that affect the whole world, social unrest that affect only a little place like Hong Kong, Sino-China trade war between two countries, and the geopolitical situation between China and Hong Kong, all of these added together. These are really very interesting topic for study by itself. When we think about how these complex situations affect a female academic, which is the topic of today, that I think is really something really worth ourselves looking into. From my point of view, I think that an academic institution is the best place for exploring answers to questions. So I think it will be, you know, very interesting for all of us to really tease out some of these issues. Some are particularly relevant for us in Hong Kong alone. Some are really generally applicable. There are social unrest currently. I think it is still going on in Thailand, for example, you know, in various parts of the world, in Spain, for example. So some of these models are applicable to many other places in the world. So obviously this is a very complex question. I cannot give you a simple answer, but this is my view.
That is a great answer, Maha. It is a very complex issue. Next question is from Anne Gabriel from Elsevier. Hi, Anne. I remember meeting you at an APRU meeting recently. Are there international research collaborations or structures across institutions that can stem the tide of female attrition? And she's particularly thinking of how we use the APRU network as an example. So perhaps I'll ask Joanna that question to see how she thinks that the APRU Women in Leadership group could help address this.
Well, I think that's exactly why we have the collective. That's exactly why we do have the participation. We're thinking about not only doing our mentoring program right now that we are doing, but also building up new networks, new collaborative experiences. So please, send an email. We can start new discussion groups. We can start new collective groups that can share. Given that we have 56 institutions in APRU, that's like enormous wealth. Basically, as a collective, we cover all the disciplines, all possible dimensions, all different kind of ways of approaching the same question and so forth. So I urge everybody, those of you who are right now participating, if you have ideas, or if you're looking for partners, or if you're interested in starting a discussion group, we're certainly open to hear from you and engage in connecting with other institutions. I mean, this is exactly one of the things that APRU is doing. It's building these collective groups. As you remember, I show all these different research that are going on right now, and they have been extremely successful projects and wide-ranging projects. health and ocean and technology and so forth. So there's plenty of room. But also I think this is a way to advance junior faculty, provide that access to networks to connect with others. So I think there are a lot of different ways that we can think about it.
I'm pausing, switching on my microphone because the dogs are going crazy. Someone's at the door. So I'm going to ask the next question quickly. So the next question's from Debbie Jansen from the University of Bath in the UK. And she's interested in the fact that we've mentioned that graduate students are particularly impacted. And I think it would be interesting to hear from all our speakers about how our universities are dealing with our graduate speakers during this period. So perhaps Maiha, we'll start with you.
I think that we are aware of the situation, and I am particularly sort of passionate about postgraduate students and early career researchers. You know, it's not just the postgraduate students. During the lockdown period, we don't have a complete lockdown, but you know, there are periods when the students have to be staying at home, and they are staying at home. They have a hard time reaching out to various facilities or information, you know, not like a faculty who would still try their various means, but these are students, and some of them are even new students. So, and also with the accommodation, you know, living in a hostel, all of these various restrictions. I'm aware of it. I'm aware of that situation, and I am trying. We are trying to join hands with other institutions and organizations, really trying to set up, for example, virtual programs, online courses, virtual internship, anything that we could think of to provide the opportunities and support. So I would just say the two big points. One, we must be aware, increase our awareness of the real need for the students and the junior researchers. Secondly, really provide support collectively. I think I can only think about these two. I have to confess that work is going on. You know, there isn't anything so concrete yet. Work is going on, but we are seriously aware of the problem.
Kalindi or Joanna, did you want to add something there? No? No?
Well,
okay.
Go ahead, Kalindi. You wanted to say something? So I just want to add another dimension to the graduate students, and that is international graduate students, right? Because every university has our students who are coming from the same culture, but they might be transnational students, or they might be of different diaspora ethnic group. And then we have international students. And for those international students, there's an additional layer of cultural challenges, of time zones. Some of those students are with us on the campus. Some of them left, they are somewhere else. They are like Bahar in the middle of the night taking courses, right? They taking exams, and there is again the lack of the social network, the kind of a sense of belonging. How do we enhance, how we build that sense of belonging, even though you're millions of miles away on the other end of the world? I think that's going to have a major implications for the future, because again, these graduate students or these international students, they're not building networks. It's much harder to build networks on the Zoom. So those are like additional, not only cultural, but also, you know, daily routines, daily practices, socializing, communicating, and that those are the things that I see in the future as really impacting. And again, if we're going to add race and ethnicity and issues of intellectual, physical abilities, and single mothers, and I mean, socioeconomic, right? All these identity markings, if we're going to add, that's really create a very challenging climate and situation.
It really is. So we have a question from Pooja Kapai. I won't read the entire question, but essentially it goes to, could APRU as a network use that collective power to lobby for change, specifically maybe writing to funders to ask them to change the way they measure success? So Joanna, would you like to comment on that? Is that something that you think that we could do as part of our Women in Leadership group?
We certainly should, and Kadi, as you're the co-chair also, I think it's exactly, and Mahar, obviously you're part of the group too. I think we should. I think we should start really talking more and leverage that power, and leverage the power of the collective. I think on two levels at least. One is at the international, at the global level, and create more opportunities and work with the funders and start up some, funding support, but also at the national level, because the fact that we are participating in APRU does provide us the leverage and access to resources and the collective of the institutional groupings that we have, and then we can translate it obviously into the institutional level. So it's almost actually like three levels that we could think about. But Kati, I happy to continue conversations and see what both of our groups could do together.
Yeah, I think it's a good opportunity, particularly because all our institutions are collecting a lot of data at the moment. So potentially we could compile that data and use that as our evidence when we do approach funders and governments and even university leadership teams. We have a question from Suat Yan Lai from asking Maiha, in the CUHK mentor-mentee program, what are the issues or concerns being raised by most mentees?
In our short survey, we do have some open-ended questions, room for open-ended questions. And in fact, I had summarized that in the last slide. These include a few points that I had covered. Time for, helping with the teaching, with the online teaching, and those deadlines for the grants and the reports and so on. So essentially, the major points I had already covered. But this was a short survey for only the mentors and mentees group. It's not sort of university-wide. I think it's a very good start. It would be interesting to broaden the survey and the study and find out more from a sort of broader audience in addition to just the mentor-mentee groups.
We could actually share these kind of tools.
Exactly.
Because, right? The different institution could apply them or adjust them to their own context. But the fact that it's already something developed would be great to use somewhere else. So let's we could think about this way too.
Yeah. I think this is a short survey, not too sort of draining in terms of time. And this may be opportunity for APRU and for the various members to find out a little bit from our member institutions.
On that very positive note, I think that's a good place for us to wrap up the Q&A session. So I'd really like to thank all of our panelists, Baha Mehmani from Elsevier, Joanna Rogolska and Kalindi Vora, both from UC Davis, and Maiha Sham from CUHK. Thank you all for sharing your knowledge and your experience and your ideas. Now, we're very keen to hear from all of the audience, so please do send any suggestions or ideas through to the APRU Secretariat. I know that the APRU Women in Leadership Committee would be very happy to explore the ideas that you do have, so please keep them coming. I'd just like to say that the webinar was organised both by APRU and the University of Sydney, so I'd really like to thank the teams that were involved behind the scenes, coordinating everything, from the APRU team in particular, Jackie and Anya, who have done an amazing job with the technology, and we've managed to get through the entire session without any glitches apart from my animals carrying on, which they couldn't control from Hong Kong. The recordings and the slides will be shared via an email and on the website apru.org. Where also so we've got the website there, and we've also got upcoming events on the website apru.org. There have been some fantastic webinars, and I guess that's something I'd really like us to reflect on, because although it's been a really tough year, for me personally, there have been some real positives, and some of those positives have been these webinars, because often, you know, not everyone can find the time or the funding to go to a conference like this, but having these short meetings where we can tune in, whether it's at 3 a.m. or 5 p.m. or at lunchtime, works really well. And the APRU webinars, I found in particular, are a really great way to connect with people, and people who have very similar interests. The topics have been very wide ranging, so I really would encourage you to check out the APRU events and try to join as many of those as you can. So I've noticed my own Twitter buzzing in the background, so if you would like to exchange ideas, please tag APRU 1997 or hashtag APRU. I'm on there as well, so feel free to look me up at Kathy Belov on Twitter. But from me, thank you to all of you. It's been lovely to have you join us for this session. Thank you to our speakers. As we go into the countdown for the Christmas holidays, I wish you all the very best for the holiday season. I hope you manage to have a bit of a rest, stay safe, stay healthy, and we look forward to connecting sometime soon.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.